Good evening. This is chapter 7 of J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan and Wendy, retold for little people. The little house is built. When the 5 other boys came back with their bows and arrows, they found Wendy lying on the ground, and Tootles feeling ever so pleased with himself. He cried, "We are too late, I have shot the Wendy." They did not hear Tinker Bell saying "silly ass" as she flew away to hide. Tootles had done exactly what she wanted, and he would get all the blame. The boys crowded around Wendy, and Slightly was, as usual, the first to speak. He said in a frightened voice, "But this is not a bird. I think it's a lady." Tootles began to tremble. Could it be a lady? "Then we have to kill her," said Nibs. "I see what it is." "I see what it is," said Curly. "Peter was bringing us a lady." "Yes, a lady who would take care of us," said the twins, "and now Tootles has shot her." Tootles was very pale. He said he had never seen a lady except in dreams, and then he called her Pretty Mother. But when a real lady came, he went on sadly, "I shot her." They were all thinking the same thought. "Oh, won't Peter be angry?" And Tootles said he should go away. He was so afraid of Peter. But now they heard Peter crowing loudly overhead, and the next moment he dropped down beside them. They were all, except Tootles, standing close around the body of Wendy, hoping Peter would not see it. "I am back again," said Peter. "Why don't you cheer?" They tried to cheer, but no sound came out of their mouths. "I have brought you a mother at last," said Peter joyfully. He expected them to say how clever you are, but they didn't. Peter became rather anxious. He said, "She flew this way. Haven't you seen her?" "Peter," said Tootles, "I will show her to you. Get back, twins, let Peter see." Peter looked at Wendy lying there, with the arrow still sticking in her. He did not know what to say or to do. After some time he remarked that Wendy was dead. "Perhaps she is frightened of being dead." He went on. He thought of making a joke out of it and hopping on one leg. "I told you Peter was quite heartless, but somebody ought to be punished." So he took the arrow out of Wendy's breast and asked whose was it. Tootles bravely answered that it was his. Peter was then going to stab him with it, and Tootles kneeling, waiting to be killed. He was sure he deserved it, but somehow Peter could not make up his mind to kill Tootles, and while the rest were watching him in wonder, Nibs was watching Wendy. He cried, "The Wendy lady moved her arm. I heard her say, 'Poor Tootles.'" Peter said, "Then she is alive." "The Wendy lady is alive," shouted Slightly. Peter knelt by her and found that the button he had given her, which she had put upon the chain around her neck, had saved her life. The arrow had struck against it. Wendy was not dead. She was only fainting. "Do get better quickly, Wendy," said Peter. "I want to show you the mermaids." But of course she wanted the Wendy to be killed. Peter did not know what this meant, but when they told him how Tink had screamed at them to shoot the Wendy, he was shocked and said, "Tink, I will not be your friend anymore. Go away forever." Tink begged and prayed, but Peter would not listen until he saw Wendy move her arm again, and then he said, "We'll go away for a whole week anyhow." And Tink flew away as cross as two sticks. Peter and the boys were wondering what to do with the fainting Wendy. Curly said, "Let us carry her down into our home," and Slightly agreed that this was the proper way to behave to ladies. "Oh no," said Peter. "It would not be respectful to touch her." "Just what I was thinking," said Slightly. "But she will die if we leave her here alone," said Doodles. "Yes, she will," said Slightly. "But there is nothing else to be done." "Oh, but there is," cried Peter. "We will build a little house all around her." Wasn't this a clever plan? Peter made the boys fetch branches and moss and furniture from the house underground as fast as they could go, and while they were scurrying all over the place, almost tumbling over each other, they were so eager to please Peter, two sleepy persons crawled in among them. These were John and Michael, who kept on going to sleep and just waking up enough to take another step and then going to sleep again. Peter had quite forgotten them, but when they said, "Hello, Peter," he began to remember. They asked, "Is Wendy asleep?" Peter was busy measuring Wendy so as to leave some room besides her for a table and chairs. He said yes without thinking. "Let's waken her to make us some supper," said Michael. But Peter commanded them to help build Wendy's house. He told Curly to see that they did. John and Michael were so surprised at the idea of building a house for Wendy that Michael forgot to say, "I won't," and John forgot to be sleepy. They were at once made to work like anything. "First we must put the table and chairs and fender," said Peter. "Then we shall build the house all around them." "Yes, I remember," said Slightly. "That was the way a house is built." "Slightly, go and fetch a doctor," said Peter. "Aye, aye, sir," said Slightly. He went away and returned with John's top hat on. He made believe to be a doctor, and as Peter did not know the difference between real and make-believe, this did very well. Peter called him sir and Slightly pretended to put a glass thing in Wendy's mouth. When he took it out again, he told Peter it had cured her. Next, he ordered that she was to be given beef tea out of a cup with a spout on it. Then he took back the hat, which was quite real, to John, from whom he had borrowed it without asking. The odd thing was that Wendy really was getting better. She began to move a little, though her eyes were still shut, and by her mouth opened. "Perhaps she is going to sing in her sleep," said Peter. "Wendy, will you sing what sort of a house you would like?" Wendy then sang a little verse, still with her eyes shut. "I wish I had a pretty house, the littlest ever seen, with funny little red walls and the roof of mossy green." They got it made almost at once, because they had all the building stuff ready, handy. They sang as they worked. The little house looked so jolly, with red branches and green moss and make-believe roses. Besides it, they had put the nicest things from the house under the ground, and when they thought it was all properly finished, Peter told them they had forgotten the door knocker and the chimney, so they put the sole of a shoe for a knocker, and John's top hat, with the bottom taken out, made a splendid chimney. is just what I am. I will do my best. Children, before I could put you to bed, I will finish the story of Cinderella." So they all squeezed somehow into the little house while Wendy told them stories, and then they were tucked up in bed in their own house under the trees. Wendy was most beautifully motherly. When she had gone to sleep in the little house, Peter, with his sword drawn, stood and watched outside. Everything was bright and happy, as could be. The fairies going home late found Peter asleep too. This amused them very much, but did not surprise them. They had got used to Peter by now. Chapter 8. All Sorts of Adventures. As there was plenty of room in the house underground, Peter ordered that the 3 little darlings should live there with the lost boys. So Wendy and John and Michael were each given a hollow tree for going down and up again, and they soon learned to go up and down as easily as if they had done it all their lives. The house underground had only one room, but that was very large. There were stout mushrooms to sit on, which grew out of the floor. There was a tree trunk which did for a table, only it had to be sawed off every day to keep it short enough. The fireplace was a jolly big one, so that Wendy could dry her washing. There was an enormous bed in which all the boys slept as close as sardines in a tin. Nobody could turn around unless they all turned. Only Michael was hung up in a basket, because Wendy didn't want him to grow up too soon, and the basket made him seem more like a baby. Wendy herself slept in her own little house, but of course it was rather a plain sort of room. There was nothing at all grand in it, and nothing very beautiful, except just one place, a square hole in the wall, about the size of a canary's cage, with a curtain drawn across, and the most charming furniture inside, a mirror and a washstand and a chest of drawers, the tiniest you ever saw, and a couch with a bedspread of fruit blossom, rugs and a carpet, and even a chandelier, though the person who lived there lit up the place herself. You will have guessed by now that this person was Tink. She was very conceited about this exquisite little room of hers. She boasted about it to the other fairies, but nobody was ever invited in. Wendy was kept very busy with such a large family to look after, sewing and mending and darning stockings and cooking for 8 boys, and herself and Peter took up a lot of time. Besides, for hours every evening she had to tell all the stories she could remember. But she didn't mind so much work because she was so extremely happy. She just loved being a mother to so many children. It was the greatest fun for her. Sometimes, of course, Wendy thought about home, about Mr. and Mrs. Darling and Nana, but she was quite easy in her mind about them. She was sure that she and John and Michael could get back again whenever they liked, and that the nursery window would be left open for them to fly in. She was a little bit bothered to see how John and Michael had nearly forgotten their old home. Already she wrote out questions on a slate for them to answer, like, what is the colour of mother's eyes? Which is taller, father or mother? Describe mother's party dress, and so on. Now the boys wanted to be given these questions too, slightly wrote an answer to every single one, but of course it was all wrong. However, John's answers were quite stupid, and Michael was not at all sure whether Wendy wasn't his real mother. By and by, Wendy found herself forgetting too. Time goes very fast in the Netherland. Peter did not play in this slate game, partly because he could neither write nor spell, and partly because he thought all mothers were silly. There was one of Wendy's stories about Mrs. Darling, which she simply hated, and he went out by himself in a huff whenever this was being told. No one ever knew what happened when Peter was away alone, but it looked as if he were having adventures pirates cooked so that the boys might die after eating it. It was found time after time, hidden in different places, but Wendy always snatched it away before any boy could so much as nibble at it. So it became quite old and hard, and came in handy for throwing at the pirates. And there was the adventure of the Never Bird, whose nest fell out of a tree into the lagoon. But she went on sitting upon her eggs, and Peter commanded that she was not to be disturbed. And there was the adventure of the large leaf on which Tink and some rude little street fairies, finding Wendy asleep, put her afloat, hoping she would be carried away by the tide. Tink, you see, was just as spiteful as ever. But Wendy awoke and swam back. However, the adventures of the Mermaid's Lagoon, I think, was the biggest of all. The mermaids did not like the boys coming to play in their lagoon, and they objected so much to Wendy that they would dive at once if they saw her and splash her with their tails, if they possibly could. This was very unfriendly, for Wendy would have liked to talk to them, if it were only a few words about the weather, but they never said a single civil thing to her, not even good afternoon, or they would chatter by the hour with Peter. One summer day, the boys were lying in the sun, dozing on the great rock called Marooner's Rock. Wendy was wide awake, stitching away at her needlework. Suddenly the air grew dark and cold, and there came a funny sound, nearer and nearer across the water. Wendy did not know what it was, but Peter did. It was the noise of muffled oars. Now nobody but the sly pirates would use muffled oars. In fact, they were the only people on the island who had any oars at all. So when Peter shouted, "Pirates, dive!" everyone woke up and jumped into the water. Peter and Wendy stayed together behind the rock, where they were not likely to be seen. The pirate's dinghy was rowed up to the rock by Smee, the boatswain, and his comrade Starsky, both of them thoroughly bad men. They had taken prisoner the redskin princess, Tiger Lily. They had tied her hand and foot and were going to leave her on the rock to be drowned. This shows how black-hearted they were. Peter made up his mind to save Tiger Lily. The easiest thing would have been to wait till the pirates had gone away again, but Peter did not care for an easy way. He bobbed up and down in the water. Behind the rock, and imitating the voices of Hook. So cleverly that Smee and Starsky thought it was their captain calling to them. Peter ordered them to set Tiger Lily free and let her go. He said he would claw them if they didn't obey at once. They thought this was very odd, but they were afraid to contradict their captain. They cut the cords around Tiger Lily's arms and legs, and she slipped into the lagoon and swam ashore. Peter and Wendy were delighted at seeing this, and Peter was just about to give one of his most conceited crows when Wendy put her hand over his mouth. But the real Hook was now shouting over the lagoon as he swam to the rock. "Boat ahoy!" he cried. The two pirates showed a lantern and lighted him so that he climbed up beside them and sat down all dismal and dripping, resting his head on his hook. Oh, how he groaned and sighed. Smee and Starsky could not think what was the matter with him, but at last they ventured to ask him, "What's up, Captain?" Hook replied with a hollow voice, "Those boys have found a mother." "What is a mother?" asked Smee. He had never been properly taught. "This mother, said Hook, and he pointed to the Never bird sitting on her floating nest. That nest must have fallen into the water, but would the mother desert her eggs? No. If she is a mother, said Starsky, perhaps she is sticking about here to help Peter. Hook said that was just what he was afraid of. Smee and Starsky then understood that Peter and the boys were quite safe, who could come to no harm from wicked pirate plots because they had a mother to take care of them. And Mother was stronger than the wickedest pirate. Whatever could be done. Suddenly Smee said, Captain, I say, couldn't we steal away the boys, Mother, and have her for our mother? Splendid, cried Hook. Yes, we will seize the children and take them to the ship and drown them all. Then we shall have Wendy for our mother. Never, cried Wendy. Behind the rock, the pirates asked, what was that? But there was silence, so they put their hands on Hook's claw and agreed to do as he had said, and to kidnap Wendy and destroy the others. Nothing could be simpler. The pirates chuckled horribly in their joy. At this minute, Hook remembered about the tiger lily. Where is the redskin? We let her go. You told us, said Smee. You let her go, cried Hook. He was fearfully angry, but when his men explained that his own voice had given the order, he was very uncomfortable indeed. So were they all? Certainly it was very queer. That somebody should be imitating Hook like that. A mermaid could not do it, nor a redskin, nor a fairy, Hook thought. Perhaps the person who is mocking me is still somewhere here. So he called out, and Peter answered him exactly in his own voice, just like an echo, only he did not say the same words. Stranger, who are you? Said Hook. I am Captain James Hook of the Jolly Roger, replied Peter. Then who am I? Said Hook. Only a codfish, said the voice. Hook was very much annoyed. He shouted, Have you another name? This was only a trick and a trap, but Peter was feeling so frightfully conceited that he did not see what Hook was after, and he answered in his most proper voice, I have. Hook went on making guesses, and at last he got as far as this, that the voice belonged to a wonderful boy who was close to, but could not be seen. You can't guess, crowed Peter. Do you give it up? Yes, yes, cried the pirates. Well then, I am Peter Pan. Take him, dead or alive, screamed Hook. Are you ready, boys? Shouted Peter. Aye, aye, sir. This answer came from different parts of the lagoon. Then go for the pirates. And the fight began. I'll be back again to read Chapter 9, Rescued from the Rock. I hope you enjoyed the reading tonight. Very lucky to be joined by May May, who likes a nice bedtime story. Sleep well. It's all from Sofia for tonight. I hope you will join me